Revendreth. Whilst souls that the Arbiter judged beyond redemption would be sent to the Maw, those that could possibly see the error of their ways would go to Revendreth, where they would be tortured and punished until they repented. The cruel and evil acts that the soul had performed in life would be inscribed on sin stones, which they would be forced to carry around with them. The more sinful the person, the bigger and heavier the stone. But once they had repented for their sins, the sin stone could be put down on the ground and left behind. And that's pretty much all we really need to know before jumping right in. The champion arrived in Revendreth, and after a little bit of a tour from two little cockney munchkins, we met a seemingly important Venthyr called Lord Chamberlain, who informed us that Sire Nathria was already aware of our coming, and was eager to meet the mortal who had been frolicking and faffing about the realms of death. However, en route to Castle Nathria, our carriage was set upon by rebels, tossing us from the cliff into a swamp filled with anima-starved devourers below. We fought our way through those things, back to the road, and continued on to Darkhaven, finding the citizens of that place a little bit pissed off, struggling with the anima drought, as well as high anima taxes levied on them by Sire Nathria. But we just went ahead and passed right through there, finally arriving at Castle Nathria, and at last meeting the ruler of the realm. Although he was a gracious host, the Sire was unwilling to help Ardenweald. Revendreth had its own problems. Perhaps if the champion put down the rebellion though, maybe then assistance could be provided. Denathrius then introduced us to his court of harvesters, folks who ruled over the different wards of Revendreth, each with a unique medallion which contained a portion of Sire Denathrius' power. There were supposed to be 7 members of the court, however only 4 presently stood by him. Revendreth's oh-so-charming ruler asked us to accompany Lord Chamberlain in capturing the Accuser, the former Harvester of Pride, but now leader of the rebellion, with Denathrius handing Lord Chamberlain the Medallion of Dominion to assist with this task. Albeit as a loan, the medallion was meant for a different ally, apparently, but Lord Chamberlain was welcome to claim the Accuser's medallion once she had been subdued. So we went ahead and did that, heading to the Halls of Atonement and fighting our way towards the Accuser's heavily defended Sinstone. Once we reached it, we learned that reading a person's sins from their Sinstone at them was a good way to weaken a target. Individuals within Revendreth spent most of their time running away from their past, so when forced to face it, they'd have some kind of weird breakdown or something. But as Lord Chamberlain began listing off the Accuser's sins, nothing happened. She declared that she was proud of the sins she had overcome, at which point Lord Chamberlain remembered he had the Medallion of Dominion. He summoned an echo of the Accuser's daughter, whom she'd murdered. Things then got real dark real fast, with the dead murdered daughter thing understandably getting under the Accuser's skin quite a bit, allowing us to easily capture and escort her back to Denathrius, who then stripped her of her position and gave her a stern telling off. As a reward, we received an invitation to join the Fearstalker, Harvester of Dread, in the Penitent Hunt, a torturous event designed to inspire fear in stubborn souls. However, during that, the Accuser managed to separate us from the Fearstalker, promising that she could show us outright proof that Denathrius was the true enemy of Revendreth, conjuring a magical doorway that allowed us to step inside Castle Nathria and see that the Sire was absolutely hoarding anima within it. However, Denathrius sensed our intrusion and ordered yet another harvester, Lady Enerva Darkfane, to take our asses. And although the Accuser did manage to conjure an exit, allowing us to escape that raid boss, it wasn't long before we were set upon by the Fearstalker and her minions instead. Eventually we managed to trap and defeat the Fearstalker, and in doing so retrieved her Medallion of Dread. So, we now held a pretty powerful artifact, which would definitely come in handy for the rebellion, even though it will never be mentioned again in this book. Which is just another example of why these sections are a little bit weirdly written. You know, like when an old person is telling a story and they keep trailing off like, it was a Wednesday, or was it a Tuesday? And you're stuck there thinking, is that relevant? Anyway, the Accuser then tasked us with a new mission: find, liberate, and bring back Prince Renathul, the true leader of the rebellion. The first Venthyr Denathrius had ever created, and therefore the closest thing he had to a son. Renathul had grown suspicious of the Sire's schemes, and so had been banished to an unknown fate. Unknown at least to the Accuser, but she pointed us in the direction of someone who might know. Theotar, an utterly insane person, who could be found in the Ember Ward. Now the Ember Ward was filled with light, which had lingered after an ancient battle. A long time ago, an affront to the light had been committed, involving Nathrezim being sneaky buggers, forcing the Naru to respond. They blighted the Ember Ward with holy magic, making the whole place uninhabitable to the Venthyr. But We're not Venthyr, so we're fine in that environment. But things got kinda interesting there for a brief moment, didn't they? Anyway, we found and rescued Theotar, who informed us that Renathal had been dragged off to the Tower of Sinful. So, we head there, finding Vorpalia, the sentient blade of the prince, inside. A blade which then disclosed that Renathal was not here either. He'd been sent to the Maw, apparently. With Vorpalia's help, we entered the jailer's realm and freed the prince. However, he wasn't willing to leave without giving us a tutorial on Torghast first, the jailer's seat of power, and also a prison to those he considered the greatest threat to his plans. This tower was endlessly shifting, like some kind of roguelite or something, filled to the brim with domination magics. To enter Torghast was to risk certain capture and unspeakable torment. But who cares? We went to Torghast, we rescued Renathal's allies, and everything was fine. We then returned to Revendreth with all those we'd rescued, at which point it was decided that now was the time to strike at Denathrius. So we did that. We did a bunch of things that culminated in striking at Denathrius. Eventually, Renathal spied an opportunity to catch the sire alone and vulnerable, but Denathrius' sentient sword Ramonia got in the way of that, attacking Renathal on its own and relentlessly slicing away at the poor bloke until the prince collapsed at his father's feet. At which point, Denathrius forced Renathal to watch as all of the anima he'd been harvesting these long years of drought was released and sent to flow directly into the Maw. The jailer would be freed, and death would dominate all who opposed them. And with that, Denathrius and his sword buggered off, back to Castle Nathria, leaving the devastated, disillusioned rebel leader and us behind, having actually kinda lost for the first time in a while. Balls. Next, Covenants. Now that all the levelling zones were finished, the champion returned to Oribos, with Telenara requesting that we join them in an audience with the leaders of each major afterlife. It was during this little gathering that the Archon learned of the Primus' fate, and Renathal informed both the Archon and the Winter Queen of Sire Denathrius' treachery, and all of the things that had just happened in Revendreth. This news shook the other Eternal Ones for a brief moment, before they collected themselves and announced that we must prepare ourselves for the coming war, and get ourselves raid ready and stuff. The champion of Azeroth must choose to join a covenant from among the four realms: the Kyrian of Bastion, the Necrolords of Maldraxxus, the Night Fae of Ardenweald, or the Venthyr of Revendreth. By forming a bond, we could not only further empower ourselves, but also be forced to capture all of the footage from every single Covenant campaign as well. Great! Unfortunately, there was pretty much a best choice for every class when Shadowlands was current, so ultimately, it wasn't really a choice at all. We'll do the Ardenweald campaign first. Chandra's Feathermoon had travelled to the Shadowlands in pursuit of her adoptive mother, deeply concerned about Tyrande and fearful that the High Priestess would be forever lost to her fury. Chandras and the champion travelled to the Maw, discovering a trail of corpses, a trail which led them directly to Tyrande. However, the High Priestess refused to leave. Her people were still trapped here, all the souls that had been lost during the burning of Teldrassil. So, the champion freed as many souls as they could, promising to take them to Ardenweald, and Tyrande just buggered off, continuing her pursuit of Sylvanas, spewing a load of moon juice out of herself everywhere she went. Upon returning to Ardenweald, Ysera informed Chandris that she knew of someone that might be able to assist: Theonax, a soul who in life had also taken on and been consumed by the power of the Night Warrior. Theonax was initially reluctant to talk, but after saving his husband from some kind of curse, he revealed that it was possible to share the power of the Night Warrior, therefore easing the burden it places upon one person, potentially preventing someone from being utterly consumed by it. It was a dangerous process though. Sharing it with his husband had not been enough and had killed both of them. If an attempt was to be made to save Tyrande, Night Warrior energy would need to be shared among many individuals. Also, Holn Highmountain happened to dwell in Ardenweald too, and after helping him with a hunt, he offered to assist Chandris in this mission to track down others who had taken on the mantle of Night Warrior in life. Meanwhile, the champion joined Arelon at some point in a little investigation of some more groves overrun by Blighted Trust. But during that, Arelon went missing. And also, we assisted one Sandy in a bunch of things as well. The Lower of Death was concerned after several other Lower sleeping within Ardenweald had not yet been reborn and had in fact gone missing. Searching for them led to Muitzala, the original Lower of Death. Unfortunately, one Sandy's greedy predecessor and sort of mentor had joined forces with the Jailer and was playing silly buggers with the missing Lower and Wild Gods and other stuff. I'm just going to gloss over the Other Side dungeon completely, but basically we drove Muitzala there and took his ass. And later on in the campaign we met back up with one Sandy at his necropolis in Nazmir, where we performed a ritual to extract information from Wurzala. With the spirit of Vol'jin joining us, and learning that the whispers of the lower he had heard, telling him to make Sylvanas war chief, were in fact this previous lower of death being a tricky dicky twat. We then ventured into the moor, tracking down another wild seed that Wurzala had stolen, one containing the wild god Ashamain from the War of the Ancients. Also finding 3 lower, Hyreek, Shadra, and Razan as well. Unfortunately, Razan was beyond help due to all of the torture he'd suffered, but the former lower of kings offered to transfer his essence to the spirit of Vol'jin, so that a part of Razan may be reborn within the former war chief instead. So they did that, and we then returned back to Ardenweald with all those we'd rescued, with the Winter Queen agreeing to take these new charges into her care until they could be reborn, an invitation she even extended to Vol'jin. Since his soul was now entwined with a lower, he too now had the opportunity to be born anew. Anyway, after all of that shit, it was then decided that we would just go ahead and take the fight to the Drust. So we did, smashing our way through a whole bunch of the buggers to reach their leader Gorak Zar, at which point we took her ass. Unfortunately, Lady Moonberry sensed something was amiss as we struck the killing blow. 'Twas an illusion. We had not killed Gorak Zar. We'd killed Arelon. And to make matters worse, the Blighted Drust had launched a full-scale invasion on the Grove of Awakening, whilst we were here accidentally killing our friends. We rushed back to the Grove, with even the Winter Queen herself joining the fray, and through the combined efforts of pretty much everyone, the Blighted Drust and Gorak Zar were defeated, making the forests of the Winter Queen finally safe, and all things right in the world, apart from Arelon being dead. But we all make mistakes and everyone should just get over that. Next, the Crest of Ascension. Meanwhile, champions choosing the Covenant of the Kyrian returned to Bastion, assisting Clea with her ascension. And this section is particularly annoying, so I'm going to stop after this bit. Enough of Bastion's anima stores had been refilled, so the Kyrian could now afford to ascend some of their top aspirants. So we did that. The final task involved in Clea's ascendancy was a trial run of the job itself. She was to bear her first soul from the mortal realms to the Shadowlands. And guess what? That first soul was located back on Azeroth, in Lakeshire. So, we joined Claire as she head to Azeroth, perved on some random person's final day for a bit, and then ferried that soul to the Arbiter. Unfortunately, Claire then watched in horror as that soul just bypassed the Arbiter completely and went straight to the Maw. Oh yeah, forgot about that I guess. Probably should have said something. But even though that was a complete waste of time, Claire had indeed completed her final trial, and was ready to ascend. As her new wings unfurled, however, Bastion then fell under attack from none other than Devos, the Paragon of Loyalty turned Paragon of Doubt. Before facing her though, we encountered Uther again, who attempted to convince us to join him, stating that the Archon had lied, stolen his justice. Devos could lead us to a better future. In response, we smiled, nodded, and then did the Spires of Ascension dungeon and killed Devos. Leadership of the Forsworn immediately fell to Lasonia, who cheesed it with Uther, meaning the immediate threat was now over. However, the Crest of Ascension was shattered during the attack. Without it, the Kyrian could not create any more Ascended. Mechanicos, the Forgelight Prime, could repair the crest, but he needed a special hammer, Phaistos, Genesis of Eons, stolen by the Forsworn at some point. So we retrieved that item, and the crest was repaired, resolving that problem in 2 sentences. But, oh no, the crest was still weakened or something. We needed to empower it. So we joined Pelagos in journeying to Maldraxxus, lending our strength to the Necrolord's assault on the House of Constructs yet again. And the heart of the Constructs leader, Margrave Garmal, aided in restoring the crest. That couple of sentences flowed nicely and certainly didn't read like a complete and utter plot contrivance. Next we went to Revendreth, further empowering the crest with the Seal of Contrition. And our final stop was Ardenweald. I'd forgotten why we were even doing this. In Ardenweald, we met a fairy called Willow Blossom, who requested that we grab a bunch of things needed for a ritual that would provide us with the Vessel of Ardenweald. But, when the time came, Willow Blossom revealed that she was the vessel. In order to empower the crest, she would need to become part of it. Something that she was very happy to do. Honoured, in fact. Pelagos was very sad, but I didn't give a shit, because I've only just met this person. Apparently, though, we vowed that Willow Blossom's sacrifice would be remembered for eternity. And with that story of some fairy I've forgotten the name of already out of the way, the Crest of Ascension was finally repaired and empowered and back to working order. Fantastic. We then returned to Bastion, only to find reports that Lasonia and Uther were now headed to the Temple of Humility. So we head there, witnessing the two of them engaged in combat with the Paragon of Humility. But they cheesed it to the Maw before the Paragon could be killed, We chased after them, tracking Lasonia down, this time witnessing Helya command Lasonia to sacrifice Uther in order to empower herself. Something Lasonia attempted to go ahead and do, so we took her ass, forcing her to cheese it, yet again, for the millionth time. But due to her attempted betrayal, Uther was devastated, and ashamed that he'd let loyalty blind him. He then asked us to take him to Oribos, where he could begin his long road of healing and penance. And the last thing that happens in this section that's massively triggering my Asperger's: back in Bastion, the Archon gathered all of her forces to root out the Forsworn, once and for all, driving Lasonia and her peeps completely from the Citadel of Loyalty. But Lasonia then led a surprise assault against the Archon, in retaliation. However, the champion and Uther arrived, slaying Lasonia and stopping the assault, and all was right in the world. Uther then surrendered himself to the Archon's mercy, now understanding that justice was not for him to decide. In fact, what he'd been doing wasn't justice at all. It was vengeance. And that's it for this bunch of bullshit. I guess we can squeeze the raid in because it's a really short summary in the book, but then I am absolutely done with this episode. The fall of Castle Nathria. Before the Venthyr and Necrolord campaigns, Renathal led the champions in assaulting Sire Nathrius' stronghold, working our way from the Leeching Vaults upward, fighting against the Harvest's Huntsman Ultimor and Lady Enerva Darkfane, dancing with members of Denathrius' court for a bit, the sin-burdened soul of Kel'Thas Sunstrider, and the Stone Legion generals as well. And after all of that, we faced Sire Denathrius and his sentient sword Ramonia. However, as the Sire weakened, Ramonia pulled his essence into herself and attempted to cheese it, but failed. She was captured, with Renathal knowing exactly how to keep her imprisoned. See, we'd done the Sanguine Depths dungeon at some point apparently, and freed the Nari Zerali from there. Her light at the Tower of Dawnkeep would prevent Denathrius' sword and his essence from ever leaving. And that's it. That's the entire summary of the raid and the end of this video.